Hey there, and welcome to another Mousey Monday. I'm just going to talk about a couple of things that matter to me for the Age of the Oak campaign today. I had thought a little bit about really connecting the ideas from last time, where we're talking about like cultural differences. Someone had asked a question about whether a mouse would sort of remember that their people had been controlled in the past. And I really couldn't come up with something that felt good for that idea. So I think I'm going to try to think about that a little bit more and maybe do that next Monday. This Monday, actually, we're going to be talking a little bit about style. So Matt Colville, who is one of the big people in this space as far as learning how to dungeon master and learning how to run games, had a video recently where he talked about what is a dungeon master's style. There really isn't a lot of language about this, at least not in the popular zeitgeist, for how to determine if someone has a particular DMing style or a particular mode of DMing. And there is a lot of discussion about player style, right? Whether a player is an actor, or they are a audience member, or they're a role player, or there are all these different things, like a tactician. And a lot of the kind of conversation around that I thought was really interesting, because I think that if people understand my DMing style and how I'm planning on applying that to the upcoming campaign this summer, that might really help figure out whether my game is going to be the game for you. So let's dig into that a little bit. So for me, player style is all about improving the expectations at table, right? You figure out who the tactician is at your table, and you can then kind of understand, I understand what motivates this player, so I know what to put in front of them, what challenges I can make for them, and I know if there's sort of problems or tension within the group, where the pain points might be, right? If the tactician doesn't get a lot of crunchy encounters to really go through, or doesn't get a lot of tactical decisions or complex sort of choices, they might feel like they're not getting as much out of the game. So I can add those things in. And then if the tactician is sort of overwhelming someone and someone else is having a problem with the tactician, it's probably because the tactician has a right answer for things and is kind of overwhelming that other player, and the other players might feel like the tactician's trying to play their characters for them. And so the idea of the styles of player is really helpful for a group, for getting group dynamics to improve over time. The idea of a style of DM, I think, personally, is a little different. Because when you have a group dynamic and one person is a slightly different style, you can sort of mold some stuff around them. You can give some pieces to them and not others, where you're having this conversation individually between the DM and the players, each going through, and then to a lesser extent, the players having conversation with one another. Whereas for the DM style, because at the end of the day, you can just sort of be at a table and be like, yeah, their fun is not my fun, but I'm just going to sort of maybe space out, or, I'm going to smile and nod. Yeah, you really do enjoy that, but that's not my thing. I can be okay with it. And if you can check in, great. If you need to check out so you can sort of get more fun out of the table, that's also fine. That doesn't really work when it's the DM. Right? If you can just sort of tone out one of the players when their fun is in the spotlight, it's very difficult to do that when it's you and the DM, right? Because most of what the players are going to be doing is in the context of the DM's game, in the context of the DM's world, and in the style they're going to be playing in. So I think for this purpose, DM style is actually more important for deciding whether you want to join a game at all, whether you're going to continue in a group at all, whether this is the right fit for you. So let's talk about what my style is. So I am big on emergent play. I like, and everyone's style is going to be different for themselves and also for the game they're running. For All My style is very emergent play. We're going to figure out who your character is as we go. You don't pick skills at level 1. You pick them when they become relevant, right? Your character is always in conversation for who they might be, and us figuring out who that is along the way. The reason we use a lot of writing prompts as random encounter checks, the reason there are a lot of tables and things like that, is so we can get something that is unexpected and then figure out how we are, as a group, including myself, going to adapt and change and see how this develops. It's not just there's 2d6 creatures that are bad and we have to fight them and let's just get into combat. It's the creatures are there, they're doing something, there's a story that comes from it, and it's a question that I can't really prep for because there's too many variables, and that's really fun to me. And for my type of DMing style, there's also an idea of sort of what is in tension with one another, right? If two things are in tension, what takes precedence? So this kind of comes into play a little bit with something like a fudging video. The video for this week is actually me talking about my opinions on the idea of fudging in tabletop role-playing games, and that core concept and kind of where you stand in a lot of instances talks about your DMing style. Whether the die roll, the number that you roll, the random die, takes precedent over what would be fun or interesting or dramatic at the table, right? If the die roll says you got crit 3 times in a row and the DM says, okay, I'm going to fudge that last 20 into a 14, right? It's still a hit, or I'm going to make that last 20 a 3, so it's now a miss because this one person feels like the dice are sort of picking on them. That is them making a choice, and it's a stylistic choice, in my opinion, of saying, okay, these two things are in tension. What does the die roll say? And what do I think is going to be a better story? And they're saying my DMing style is, in those instances, sometimes I'm going to pick the interesting thing versus what the die roll says. And for me, I am much more weighted on the side of I'm going to go with what the die roll says and not what the what will be more interesting would say. Now, that isn't 100% true, right? I don't think any of these are all one or the other. For example, there are instances, usually when I roll on a random table, I'm just going to go with what it says. But there's sometimes I'm rolling on a random table for inspiration, right? We get to a prompt and it's like, what would this thing be? What would sort of make sense? And I have some motivations I can roll in a table for, and I roll up a motivation and I go, I'm not really feeling that. I don't know how to connect those dots. I don't know how to put those pieces together. And then I look at the one next to it and I go, oh, I feel that one. So I can actually do that. But for me, that's more of a performative change, right? Then we have that same tension, right? Is there a idea of we can get the perfect answer if you give me like 10 minutes and I can figure it out, versus I can get an okay answer, I can get a good answer for something that I can get quickly. I'm going to go with the thing quickly, right? Which is the same idea with rules. If we have an instance where there is what is the correct rule and what is the ruling at the table, I am going to be a very ruling heavy person, but I do think the rules matter. I do think the rules are important. And I think the rules should be the baseline. If I don't remember the rule, then I'm likely to make a ruling and I'm likely to err in the favor of the player. If I do remember the rule, even if it is sort of a negative thing, right? This is a challenge for them to overcome because this rule exists. I'm very likely to play with the rule because I think the constraints are good, right? So it is rulings over rules. If I don't know the ruling, right? And I'll make a ruling that I feel is more generous than the rule. But if I know the rule, it's going to be rule over ruling unless I decide for the entire campaign, right, that rule isn't the way I want it to be. And I'll make a ruling which will change that rule to become the new rule, right? Because I personally, as my DMing style, I like a lot of clarity in what you're going to be doing so that you can be creative with your answers, right? If you don't know exactly how stuff works, how stuff is going to kind of pan out, it's very difficult to make informed choices. So that is also my DMing style. And my DMing style for All My Say is also going to lean into the idea of what you encountered, what makes sense for the situation versus what's balanced. The what makes sense is going to be much higher, right? If you roll and you sort of stumble along out of the counties into something that's very unlucky or very, you kind of didn't bring the right skills with you, you stumble into a monster lair at level 1, that is not necessarily going to be a balanced encounter. Right? The idea of the world, as its own thing, as this sort of neutral, unthinking entity, is important to my DMing style. And I put that above whether this world feels like it is designed to be beaten, designed to be won, right? The idea of, the things that are near town or low level, the things that are slightly further away are higher level, the things that are further away from that are higher level still. It is my job to make a good mix all over the place so that the world is something that you can succeed in. But the idea that every fight is going to be winnable, every fight is balanced for what you're bringing to the table, is not my style. It isn't my style in even games where the idea of balance is core to the concept of the game, like Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition. My players learn pretty quickly that they will encounter stuff that they cannot fight, or they could fight if they wanted to, right? Everything has stats, but they might be so overwhelmed, they might be so outmatched that it is nearly impossible for them to win. And some people might say, that's a wonderful challenge. Let's go. Let's die trying. And then get very upset if they try and actually do die. So what makes sense in the world, how the world feels, the sort of vibe of the world for me takes precedence over the game balance idea, right? It makes sense that this creature is here because it's next to the waterway and there's a lot of food and there's all this stuff going on. It's not balanced because it's fairly close to town and very high level and really, really nasty. And if level 1s go here, they're probably just going to become food. But that is what makes sense in the world. So that is my style. That is my own persona of doing things. And then by that same token, what the story can be versus what the story is supposed to be, right? I have an idea of a plot that I want to run is in tension with I have an idea of what is actually happening here, what we've generated in the table, what the player's actions have done, sort of what makes the most sense in the moment, right? Who's laying down the tracks of where we're going? What's directing the storyline? For me, what the story is supposed to be, or what would make the most sense in a movie or a short story or something like that, is something that happens in retrospect. We figure that out after we actually have the gameplay element. We play the game, and then the stories we tell later, they get sort of paced by how we retell them, not by how they are presented. We might skip over things that were slow when it's in the retelling to get to the juicy bits, but I'm not going to skip over those parts in the play because it is going to make those high points of tension matter more when there's a bunch of low points where you've got sort of, oh, we're just going through the woods. We two ships in the night, right? We don't see the thing that we might have encountered and they don't see us. And, that sort of builds this, we have no idea what that thing was that we missed. It might have been really bad. It might have been really good. We don't know, right? Those lack of clarity moments, which would be very anticlimactic, very unfun, that you wouldn't have in a movie. You wouldn't have the camera focused on a group of people that are going through the wilderness and them not encountering things because they don't see it and the other side doesn't see them, right? Unless that is dramatically relevant and it's going to come up later that, the two sides pass in the night and then something happens and then now they're drawn into conflict. Unless that is narratively important, you just don't have those elements, and it doesn't need to be narratively important for it to be fun in a Wes Marches game. So for me, the story that we make at the table is infinitely more important than the story that might have existed if we had sort of pre-planned this, like a writer's room sort of thing. That is my style of play. And that doesn't mean the other style of play is wrong. I just want people to know what they're getting themselves into. And what that also leads into is how you discover things matters. So the order of discovery is something that is crucial in a lot of stories, and especially a lot of mystery stories. A lot of Wes Marches is exploration, it's discovery, it's mystery, it's having something cool over the next hill that we want to learn about. And that idea of what is happening here, we as people sort of expect to get a little clue, a little clue, a little clue, a little clue, a big clue, a little clue, a big clue, and then now it all comes together, right? There is this sort of piecemeal way, or we get a really big clue at the beginning that then leads us down this path where we get little drips and drops and drips and drops and drips, and then we finally find the answer at the end, right? There is this arc to a mystery that in fiction we all kind of intrinsically know. If you get the key to solving the puzzle at the very beginning, you can't know that's the key for the mystery to feel like there's something there, right? It's the order of discovery in fiction, because it's going to lead to drama and rising action, all this sort of stuff. It's going to have a narrative, because in fiction, whether you've got a book or a TV show or a movie, anything like that, you have a set amount of time that you're trying to tell a story in. In my games and in Wes Marches, I don't put bounds on those. I don't say that this is a mystery that's going to be solved this session, or even this is a mystery that's going to be solved in this set of sessions, or they're going to solve this problem before level 5, right? That isn't important to me. And I think the reason I work like this, the reason it is my DMing style, I think that means that when the players are much more involved in the discovery process and the exploration process, and they know that the order of discovery is not random, but is closer to random than planned, right? They might find something, they might find the 3 pieces that they need to completely solve the clue. And if you have that moment where you go, no, we have these 3 pieces that give us to an answer, but we just started learning about this mystery, so this can't be the right answer. That sort of gut feeling you get that's like, no, this is act 1 of the movie. We can't be unlocking the final scene yet. That doesn't make instinctive fictional narrative sense. That doesn't exist in this game. And it means that my style will lead into these sort of randomly spaced epiphanies where they say, oh, that has to be what's going on here. Wait a minute, we've known this for sessions. We've known this for months, but we didn't have the pieces. We didn't feel confident that we had the pieces, even though we did. And I find that sort of more organic discovery method is so much more interesting. And importantly, in a Wes Marches style setting, a more organic style discovery leads you to want to talk to the other players, wants you to indulge in that sort of fantasy of, oh, what if we have everything we need to know to solve this? We just haven't put the pieces together in the right order yet, or we haven't talked to the right person yet. Not the right NPC, but the right other player that has seen something else in a dungeon that would give us the context that we needed, even if it's a little clue for us to put all the stuff together. And that is important to me. I think that that's fun. Now, that also means that one of the things I've gotten a little bit of pushback for when I've talked to people over the years is I tell people that those people who play in my game, who seem to get the most out of it, who tell me after the fact that they are the most engaged, they're the people that are enjoying most, that are saying, man, I'm really glad that I took notes. Even if your notes are very, very basic, even if it's just a couple of words on a piece of paper, the consistent feedback that I hear from people who play in my games, who get a lot out of my games, is that notes matter. Well, why do notes matter? Well, notes matter because we need to know what makes sense, because it won't be balanced, right? It's not going to be balanced for what we should encounter. It's going to be balanced for what is there. And if you don't know what that is, you might be walking into a death trap thinking it's a cakewalk. And, if there are no notes, or rather, I should say, if you do take notes, you're going to be able to figure out what the story can be, rather than trying to figure out what the next step is supposed to be. You're going to be able to reverse engineer that fiction for yourself and remove the low points and just talk about the high points when you need to, or build it in retrospect, if you know that you have the notes to do it, right? That idea of the fiction will still be there. And the idea of discovery, right? Of what order things happen in. The flow of a lot of mysteries and the flow of discoveries is often paced so that your interest keeps getting higher and higher, right? You're going up. Oh, we haven't found something new. Oh, we found something new. Oh, we haven't seen anything new. Oh, we found something new. Oh, we haven't. And then we kind of go along this sort of peaks and valley method for attention to a particular subject, for a particular mystery, right? The idea of an A plot and a B plot, and then you sort of flip to B to A and then back to A to B, and that's kind of how you sort of keep it interesting and keep it moving down different avenues. That state happens naturally in Wes Marches. That's just gonna happen based on how missions happen and how there's all these different groups doing these different things. I don't need to know that. So without that framework to be able to predict, oh, I think we're going to get this clue next time, that means that people who have taken notes, they know where the pieces are that they've discovered, that when someone says, ooh, we found that there was this arcane rune that looked like several interlocking links, but the links were triangular in shape and there was a wavy line over top of it and it was engraved in silver with gold inlay. One group might say, man, that was super valuable, right? We sold that, we got a ton of money, we got a ton of experience, and it was great. And another person might go, that is the piece we needed. Wait a minute, when you say there's chain links, what do you mean? And how does ... right? And that all of that brings me to, right? The what makes sense is more important than what's balanced. What the story can be is more important than what the story sort of should be. And then the idea of the order of discovery and how the pieces fit together is based on just what you find and what you're invested in and where the people decide to look rather than what's supposed to be there, right? That idea of, if you look in a lot of DMing advice for how to find clues, they'll tell people, rather than here is a place where you can find a bunch of clues, I'm going to put one clue here and one clue here and one clue here and one clue here. And then what happens if they don't find those clues? Oh, well, the whole adventure is ruined. Everything falls apart. Yeah, if you're trying to get to a solution that session, it is going to not work. And so they say, rather than do that, make it to where whenever the player looks in a place, they're going to find some variety of clue, right? Where they look, there will be something that'll lead them to the answer. That's the way to make sure they stay on the rails, they stay on the track. In my game, that is the order of the fiction. If we were writing a story, if we were writing an adventure where we had to get to an endpoint, that's not the order of agency. That's not the order of an emergent play system. That's not the order that gives you the power to say, we think we know what might lead us to the answer, and we think it's way over there. So we need to go and get it. We need to go in and invest our effort into getting into a specific clue. And we might be wrong. We might be right. We might be right and not know that we're right. We might be wrong and not know we're wrong. And being able to figure those things out is really fun. And the last piece for my style of play that is core, even if I'm running a 5-man band style game, is engagement with the communities and engagement with the other players. When I am able to, as a DM, sit back and I'm not telling my story, I'm not expressing the world, I'm not sort of rendering the scenes as the computer that is the world that they're all inhabiting, and they're able to just go into chat and talk to each other and figure out things, and I can sit back and I don't have to say anything. And specifically, I have to stop myself from saying things, right? Because I believe in a low fidelity world. I believe in a world where there's lots of people that believe things that they believe wholeheartedly is true, right? They pass an insight check for whether it was true or not, but it's false, right? They are incorrect. There are deeply seated beliefs that are based on lies. There are deeply seated beliefs that are based on truths that have been lost in translation for several years. There's lots of mix and match of what is true, what is false, what is important, what is not important. And you can really only have that mix if you're including what things make sense, if you're assuming that the story is going to be whatever it's going to be as it gets made up, if the order of discovery is completely scrambled based on where we go, and if you are engaging with other members of the community versus people who are engaging with the system, with the structures that they believe they know are there. If you're engaging with that thought of, there's 2 hours left in the movie, I know we're not going to be having the final confrontation with the big bad, you're engaging with the systemic function of the movie. You're engaging with the system of play. When you're pre-building your character from level 1 to level 14, or in other systems, level 1 to level 20 or 1 to 30, and you have your character builder and you get to pick all your feats and your items and your stuff. Don't get me wrong, that is very fun. That is engaging with the system, not engaging with the community, not engaging with the people, not engaging with the emergent play elements. And my DMing style is one that is going to reward people who want to engage with the community, engage with the system as far as like making sure they understand what is possible and what makes sense, rather than engaging with the system in the way of how can I min-max this into getting what I want. Because everyone's going to want, to a certain degree, for their character to be successful. And that does mean a certain level of optimization, but you're not going to be able to sort of plan something out on the long term and then execute it perfectly, because the DM doesn't really have control over what feats you take in a lot of systems. In this system, there is a lot of control, both for the players and the DMs, over the same design space that feats occupy, which is magic items. Magic items, when you make a new magic item, you get into a conversation with your DM, and when you talk about what makes sense for that magic item, what makes sense for that moment, how do we pull that emergent play thing and push it into the future, not how do I make a magic item that makes it to where my sword does cold damage because I picked up all these feats that do cold damage, and I need the cold damage sword in order to turn my build online. There's nothing wrong with that style of play, but if you come into my game and you expect that to be the way it is, it's just not going to be fun. So I know there was a bit of a different dive for Mousey Monday and a bit of a longer rant, but I hope that in the future, if someone asks, hey, I've played a couple of games before, I've played, D&D, and I've played Pathfinder, I've played, tabletop games for several years, your DM, your game system, the thing that you're trying to get me into, how do I know if this is the right game for me, if that's the right DM for me, if their style is going to match me? Send them this video. Show people this and say, this is how this guy runs a game. And if that sounds terrible to you, great. There's so many other fun games out there to play. There's so many other things to run. Don't sort of waste your time with bad expectations, right? With a mismatch built into what you're doing. But if this all sounds like, man, that sounds so cool to be able to just build as we go and to tell this story together with whatever pieces make sense, that there is this idea of sort of an objective sort of referee rather than a dungeon master, rather than a storyteller, rather than a director. You have someone who's just sort of neutrally administering the world and trying to see what stories the players can tell rather than what stories the storyteller or the director is trying to tell. If that is the style that you'll like, then really come and join us. This campaign is going to be so much fun. It is so hard for me to explain to people just the amount of joy that I see from the people that engage with this style of play. It is one of my biggest goals in life to be able to show to people and be able to get them to understand, oh yeah, the idea that I can pop onto the Discord and I can come up with something. I'm like, hey, what about blank? And start a conversation that lasts for 20 minutes between 5 different people, some of which I may have never played with before, but they're playing in the same world as me. It's just fun. It's just interesting. It's engaging. And I hope some of you will join us. So I'll see you guys next time for Mousey Monday, where I do intend on covering the sort of overall idea of what gets remembered, what gets ingrained into a people's with repetition and with cultural changes. Or I might kind of leave that and let that stew a little bit longer in my brain and talk about something that you comment on down below. So have a good day, and I'll see you next time.